are coming in. Okay, we're hitting record. And at the end, we're actually going to have a quick survey that we're going to ask you to fill out because we really appreciate your thoughts about how the session went. It also obviously helps us inform how future sessions will go as well. And a little bit of value to you if you fill out the session within about 48 hours or so, we will send you the recording so you can kind of check it out and reference it for later. And we also, for most of our recordings, we do try to get professional notes taken as well. Awesome. So this is session 24 of our weekly seminars. That's actually almost every week, I should say. We took a few weeks break, but we do these almost every single week. And the idea is to bring experts from specifically non-technical areas in tech. So non-coding, I mean, it could be somewhat technical, but non-coding areas in tech, to learn directly from people in the field that have those roles, to understand how they navigated their careers and how they got to where they are. We feel that throughout our careers, and me and Sergey have changed careers several times throughout our lives, throughout our careers, it's always been super, super helpful to learn from people that are on the ground. That's what we try to do with all the programs that we run and all the classes that we teach, like at NYU and the like. And we think that's where the most learning happens. Also, you know, we're in a time right now where I think it's great to have opportunities for people to connect. So feel free to peek through the list of folks on the call, you know, add each other on LinkedIn, for example, if you can. Throughout the session, we encourage you to type questions into the chat. And, you know, if you heard a great, insightful question from somebody and you think it might be great to connect with them, then of course, do Google their name and try to connect with them afterwards. Part of the purpose of getting together like this in this format is to build new relationships as well and learn from each other too. So again, this is session 24, and the title of the session is Insights from a B2B Customer Success Expert. And Misha has had a lot of great experience in several name brand companies, if you will. We're going to go through her story, and then we're going to have some questions prepared for Misha. This is going to be a Q&A format conversation. Just to set the agenda a little bit, we're doing just a quick 5-minute introduction. We promise we're almost done with that one. And then we're going to jump into the conversation with Misha about her career. And we're going to, like I said, ask her some questions to kind of help navigate and dig into the story a little bit deeper. As relevant questions come up, drop them in the chat. We'll try to answer as many of them as possible. If it feels like the question just kind of way out there, again, we'll try to do, but if it's not terribly relevant, we might have to skip it. So no hard feelings, but we'll try to address as many of the questions as possible. And it does say here on the agenda that the open Q&A is from 6:50 to 7, but you can feel free to drop questions ahead of time as well. Now, we know that these seminars are a great start for many folks that are interested in learning about these careers and meeting people like Misha as part of the seminars, but we are announcing today our winter program that's coming up. We also run part-time cohort-based programs for people that want to dig deeper and learn concepts across sales, marketing, product management, and operations to get a well-rounded purview into a lot of different roles, learn skills in those different functions taught by experts in the field. And typically the people that take these classes either want to transition into tech or get jobs in tech, or just want to level up their careers and maybe get a different role than what they have now. And these are just some of the instructors that we have as part of either this program here that I'm talking about, or the weekly seminars, which many folks actually join as instructors and speakers there as well. We actually have a couple folks in this seminar here today that are part of this cohort, and we're recruiting for the winter program. The early deadline is October 15th, but we do prioritize scholarships for people that apply early. So the application takes like 2 minutes. So if you'd like to apply, there's a program link right there. And then also, if you want to learn more about that, or simply just talk about your career and get some advice, me and Vadim do info session calls every once in a while. So we're making our time available now. You can book that at school16.co/info. Awesome. And for those of you that are go-getters and want the survey link right now, here it is on the screen, but we'll drop that into the chat later. I will stop the screen share now so that we can see Misha, and we'll just dive right into the conversation. So Misha, we're excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us for this hour. And again, we'll start this conversation kind of like we start most of them, which is, I guess a little bit how you would maybe even do it in an interview, but trust me, this is a lot more low key than that. So feel free to not treat it as such. But you know, when someone asks you to kind of walk them through your story or tell them the story of career, we kind of want to hear how you usually deliver that. But yeah, maybe you can help us understand what your trajectory was from college and beyond to land in some of these great brands, and even why you got interested in customer success. And then we're going to dig into it a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I'm really excited to be spending a bit of time with you guys this afternoon. So I've been at several different companies now of different sizes, different customer success motions at each of them. As I kind of reflect back on my career, you know, customer success doesn't mean the same thing to every company, and that's definitely one thing that I've seen as I've switched roles. But to kind of start at the beginning, I'm from Washington State originally. As I was finishing up college, I actually pursued an internship. So that's kind of where it all started. I thought that maybe I wanted to go into the restaurant business because that's what my father did. So I was kind of thinking about that for a little while. I ended up getting a paid internship, which was very exciting when I was, 20, 21 years old. But it was at a small startup called Jigsaw Data Corporation. So you guys probably haven't heard of it. I see a couple nodding heads, which is surprising, but Jigsaw actually provided business contact information. So it was like a lead generation tool. So really at that point, I think I was just excited to have a real job. And it really gave me a taste of kind of what like the tech world is all about. So it was small at that time. It was very scrappy and fast paced, and you just kind of did whatever you needed to do to get the job done. So I think I got my first taste of like the technology world, right when I was finishing up college. And I really enjoyed it. There was a ton of smart people. Just to call out, I mean, usually technology jobs, the perks are good. People are fun, they're hardworking. And that was definitely the case when I started back at Jigsaw. So when I graduated college, I actually stayed and moved to a full-time employee. So I didn't actually look for any other jobs. I was comfortable there. I knew that that's where I wanted to stay. So I actually stayed right in the account management role right at Jigsaw. I think it was a really good starting place for me because I had no experience. So it was definitely a very, I would call, traditional trajectory in that role where I was like kind of in a support role. I moved to a premier support role, which was managing kind of the housekeeping back end activities for our largest customers. I think it's pretty common to see when you're just kind of like entering in and you're thinking about working with customers, it's kind of like a sales or success track. So I was faced with that decision as I was, graduating from college and going to this new role of like, what path do you want to take? I moved from a account kind of coordinator role to a sales development role, which is also something that you'll see is very, very common if you're entering kind of the sales customer success world where they're wanting you really just to be on the phone all day, every day. After I went through that, that's when I was faced with the decision of, do I want to go account management, customer success, or sales? I ultimately chose customer success. I really think for a couple of reasons. I like being able to celebrate wins with my customers and solve problems. I also really like the relationship aspect of it. And that is something that was like pivotal in my career way back when, is that I realized that I would take the long path to build a relationship to maybe celebrate a win 6 or 8 months down the road over a much more quick win and like instant gratification that you get with sales. So that's really where my career in account management or customer success started. So it was very kind of an exciting time back then because this was a very small company in Idaho, actually, and we were purchased by Salesforce in 2010. So that was a very exciting time in my career. I honestly, kind of fell into that role because Salesforce acquired us and they kept all of the customer success managers and a lot of the sales team on board because we were the subject matter experts. I would say going from a teeny tiny startup to a massive company like Salesforce, I really learned quite a bit, right? Because the way that we operated was so different. You kind of went from being able to say, hey, can you do me this favor to get this thing done, to really a lot more guardrails and process in place, which is really what you find with much larger companies. They're very well-oiled machines. So that was kind of a little bit of a shock to the system back then because we were so small at Jigsaw. You were used to just doing whatever it takes to get it done. And so it really forced the whole team to kind of integrate into the culture of Salesforce. After Salesforce, I actually ended up at Google. And when I made that move, so I had actually started thinking that I was ready to make a change. I was in Spokane, Washington. There wasn't a lot of technology jobs there. So I kind of was prepping myself for, if you want to make a change in your career, you have to be open to moving. So that is kind of what made me think like, am I ready for something new? I also got to a point where I knew the product inside and out because I had seen it grow to a very mature product. I knew all the people, I knew all the process. I just kind of felt like I was a little bit on autopilot. And I was ready for change, quite honestly. So I started kind of poking around and interviewing a couple places, and Google actually approached me. So don't underestimate the power of LinkedIn. Make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date, because that's what recruiters are really using. So Google reached out to me, and I went through the interview process, and I really just decided like, this was too good of an opportunity to pass up. It was supporting, I think it's called Google for Work now, but it's Gmail, Calendar, Google Drive. So it was a tool that I used. I understood how it worked and why it was important. And the thing about this role that was a little bit different about what I'd done in the past, where at Salesforce and Jigsaw, I was responsible for owning a book of business. So whether it be 50 accounts or towards the end of my time at Salesforce, it was more like 6 accounts. The Google job was a little bit more focused on process because they are such a massive machine. It's there has to be a lot more process built into what you're doing to make sure that you're efficient, because you can't, there's never going to be enough people to support all the customers. So process was a lot more important. And that was something in my career I started to be a little bit more interested in, is like, how do we make some tweaks to be a little bit more efficient without a human having to do something. I think it was actually just shy of 2 years at Google when I started to look at Slack. It was not the same situation I was in where I was like, I'm not, I feel like I need a change. I want to shake things up, because I was actually very happy. It was a great company. The work was exciting. But I started to talk to my customers, and Slack started coming up in the conversation. Every customer I talked to would start to mention it. So I started really just to look into it. And at this point in my career, I was kind of ready to go back to the smaller environment where you're working on small teams, you're failing fast and iterating. And that's really why I took the role at Slack, is to be a part of really kind of a groundbreaking technology with a bunch of really, really smart people.
That's a really cool career trajectory. Thank you for sharing that. I think in some ways you lucked out that the internship that you had was actually, well, first of all, you did a great job. So I'm probably, which is why they accepted giving you a full-time job. But you know, the internship that you had turned into a full-time opportunity, and obviously that's why it's so important to make sure that if you're in college or even graduate school, that you're actually spending the time on finding the right opportunities, even if it's just an internship or even if it's just some kind of project, because you never know which of those relationships could actually turn into something that's full-time. And where you did get lucky, of course, is that Jigsaw continued to grow. And we do know Jigsaw because Sergey and I actually worked for a very small business intelligence startup called Board MIT. It had nothing to do with MIT. It was out of Milan, but like Cognos and Hyperion and SAP were our big competitors. Anyways, probably most people here don't even know what those terms are. But we use Jigsaw a lot for lead gen. So when I saw Jigsaw, I was like, oh yeah, wow, I haven't heard that name in a while. But obviously the company did well and got acquired, and you landed at Salesforce. But I'm curious, you know, one thing that you mentioned, Misha, is when you went from Jigsaw, which was a small startup, to Salesforce, the biggest change that you noticed is a huge company, and probably the type of work that you did was different as well. You ended up being at Salesforce though for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so clearly you got really good at what you did there as well. So I'm curious, you know, when you were at Salesforce, I'm assuming there was or at least maybe at the very beginning, I'm assuming there was a kind of a big learning curve there. And even though the company and especially because the company got acquired in. So how did you make sure that you were accelerating your path to productivity and getting really, really good at your job at Salesforce when you were there, especially early on?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that it kind of starts to touch on why customer success, I think, is interesting to people. As customer success managers, a lot of the time are, you know, they want to go dig into problems and figure things out. So we're kind of, we're problem solvers, really. And I think that was kind of the key thing when I was going through the acquisition is, you know, taking the initiative to figure things out on my own to some extent. And the other really big thing that I think like has kind of carried through each of the positions that I've had is flexibility. Flexibility is really, really valued, especially in the tech world. Things change sometimes overnight. And so if you're able to adapt and lean into it and take the initiative to learn something new, it's something that's really, really valued and recognized. And I think that's what I did transitioning into Salesforce, because not only was it new teammates, but it was new tools. So Salesforce was using tools that we were not using at Jigsaw. And I mean, you guys probably know better than I do, but like, these tech companies are using sometimes hundreds of tools. They're using different storage tools, different project management tools. And so being able to master what I needed to do my job efficiently is something that I really kind of doubled down on, so that I understood how things worked when maybe someone else didn't want to take the time to do that.
Interesting. And actually, Kiriath has a directly relevant question. You know, between Salesforce and then Google, how were, let's say, the tools that they use different at Google, or would you experience that there was a lot more that you had to learn there on that side?
So it kind of depends. Some companies, Google is one of them, that has a build mentality. So they are more likely maybe than some tech companies to build something on their own, meaning we need a way to manage this. We're just going to go build it because they've got armies and armies and armies of engineers. So I would say Google was different than Salesforce because there was a lot of homegrown solutions, and I'm using buzzwords, but homegrown meaning that Google built it from the ground up rather than go buying it from someone else.
Got it. So another thing that you mentioned was between Salesforce, which is actually, well, at least now it's a massive company. I don't know how big it was when you were there, but it's a massive company, although primarily it's a CRM, whereas Google, all sorts of products. Yes, primarily it was search, but all sorts of products. But what you noticed is big difference. Google, a lot more process oriented. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how did you feel that when you were there as compared to Salesforce? What were some of those examples of processes that they had in place to make sure that you guys are being optimizing your work?
Yeah, I think that Google has, at least the Google for Work portion, just has a really operational mindset. So they were investing a lot in people building things to solve problems. And the reason I say that, and I felt it when I transitioned into Google, is there was a person or a subject matter expert for everything. So if I had a question about a certain process, how to close a deal or upsell a customer or whatever it is, there was subject matter experts for every single question that I had, just because there's an army of folks supporting it, and that's definitely been unique to my experience at Google, which kind of presents its own challenges, right? Because when there's an expert for everything, you have to be able to track down who that expert is. And I think that's kind of what I mean by like, they're just focused on being a really operational machine where things, because of the process is a strong foundation, things for the most part just kind of move through the life cycle very smoothly.
So Delia has actually a relevant question, which is, how would you suggest implementing process in a smaller startup where there might not be as many resources as opposed to, a larger company like Google or Salesforce?
Yeah, I love that question because Slack, so I've been at Slack for 4 years now. And when I joined, everyone thought we had so much process, and everyone was like, we've got this thing figured out. And so I'd come from Google and Salesforce, and I was thinking like, well, you guys, there's literally no process here. But it felt like a lot to these people that had been at Slack for a year longer than me, which was basically, at its inception. But I would say, just like seeing kind of the work that's been done at Slack, is pick the items that are going to be really impactful, and make sure that you are focusing on the right things, because it's really easy, and we still fall into this a little bit, to cast too wide of a net and try and focus on solving many problems, and then all of them are kind of half-baked. So I would say make sure you're focusing on the right thing. And then also, it kind of depends on the role. Like for us at Slack, when we really started to look at programs, which was probably only 2 years ago, we focused on programs that were going to impact the customer, which is really the revenue, right? So we were looking at programs to forecast risk, and programs to get executives involved in events at Slack. We just now are looking at how do we use tools and process to make CSM's lives easier. And I feel like that was kind of like a long-winded answer, but really, if the customers aren't renewing and buying more, the CSM team is in trouble. So that's where we focused our time, is like what's going to impact really the revenue.
Do you have any examples, actually, if you could speak to, so even particularly at Slack, where you came in and you saw a bunch of things that needed fixing from a process perspective for the CSM team, and you kind of prioritized one or two?
Yeah. So Slack has a ton of customers. Like, I was really shocked when I joined. Like, not all, they're paying money to varying degrees 4 years ago, but it was almost like more customers than people. So one of the things that I kind of noticed right away, and one of the areas I raised my hand to help, was actually putting a program in place to help customers formally launch on Slack. For those of you that have used or not used Slack before, it's a different tool with respect to, you don't just turn it on and everything just falls into place and it makes sense. I mean, there's some change management involved, and training involved, and all kinds of other things to really make a customer the most successful in Slack. And what I noticed is the team was doing things differently for each customer, and it varied across customer success managers. And really what that meant is you could talk to 2 different customers and the experience that they would have in the first 3 months would vary, which is a problem for multiple reasons, but really, you know, there was no consistency. So someone that joined our team didn't know what the gold standard was for working with a customer in the first 30 days. So I helped really put together kind of like a launch framework or launch methodology that really kind of guided CSMs to guide their customers through the launch phase. And just to tie it back to the point earlier about why that's important in the beginning is, we want to make sure that people are purchasing the seats or the licenses, consuming the licenses that they purchase from Slack. It's a really important piece of the puzzle, is that people are using what they've purchased.
Got it. So I actually I want to dig into that and also learn a little bit about the customer success team at Slack and how it's evolved over the last few years. But can you give me an idea of the types of customers that you primarily service? Because yes, there's probably a ton of free users at Slack, and your job is really essentially to convert them. But as a team, I'm assuming you're not really hand-holding the self-service users, right? So what are you primarily responsible for?
So the customer success team is really split in 2 ways. And I think this is pretty common in the industry. There's a scale approach, which is a pooled model. So there's a group of individuals that support hundreds and hundreds of customers, and it's really by request. So if a customer says, I need this thing, this team will deliver it. So it's a more, I would call, reactive approach to working with customers, and more program based, where they are sending out communications or tips depending on where a customer is at in their life cycle. So it's very data driven. And then on the enterprise side, so our customers that are spending more, you know, investing heavily in Slack, there is a more one-to-one model. So that doesn't mean like only one CSM to one account, but we have a book of business essentially. So I work mostly with kind of Mountain Central region enterprise customers. And, you know, there is some overlap with what we're delivering, but it's a much more proactive way of working with the customer. It's a much more catered approach, and we have some more flexibility to say, this customer is asking for this unique thing, or they have this unique business process or problem they're trying to solve. I then, you know, part of my job is to understand how Slack can help solve that problem.
Got it. That makes sense. As you said, as you're responsible for working with enterprise clients. So I'm curious, so over the last few years, how much has the customer success team grown? Because you said that it sounds like Slack has started to pay more attention to this.
Yeah, it's just exploded. So I think I was the 3rd CSM in San Francisco, like the 8th or 9th CSM globally. Now we have CSMs in California, Chicago, New York, multiple places in Europe. We also have a services arm, which is fairly new. So the services team works off of a statement of work and billable hours. So they're basically like consultants that work for Slack. They go in and they have a very defined scoped project. They deliver that, they exit, and then the CSM comes back in. I bet there's over 150-ish.
Wow.
And it might actually be bigger.
Wow, that makes sense, I guess. A little surprising for a B2B company, but Slack is essentially a consumer app at this point as well. So that kind of makes sense. I'm curious about the composition of your team. So you work specifically, it sounds like, on the enterprise account. So can you tell me a little bit about the types of people that are typically in a role like you? I mean, obviously you come from Salesforce, from Google, account management operations, highly, highly relevant. But what are the other types of characteristics that people on your team typically have? Like, where do they come from and the like?
We have a large population of ex-consultants, actually. And that's actually, I think, a little bit unique to Slack. My previous roles, there was more, I would say, a traditional customer success background. So you're working one-on-one with customers, or, you know, you're renewing customers. Slack has quite a few people that have consultant backgrounds, because they're really, really good at executing projects and solving problems. So I think it's those are probably the profiles that are the most prevalent on the team.
Do you have any examples of maybe less traditional background folks, either that you've hired or friends of yours in the team? Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got some people that have come from the education world, the nonprofit world. So it's definitely not, we're not looking for, a certain set of criteria when we're bringing in new folks. I think if anything, we're actually more, which is an amazing thing, we're much more diverse than we were back in the day. You still see the usual suspects. So it's like the Googles, the Salesforces of the world. But I think we are expanding a little bit just to make sure that, there's some diversity in the way that we're thinking and solving problems.
Now, I want to take the example of someone from the education world. When you're bringing on somebody like that, I'm assuming there's still some minimum level of experience they have to have with something. So what does that person look like?
Yeah,
Being a domain expert?
I can clarify that a little bit. I think this individual, it was a education platform. So I think she might have been like an actual teacher in the past, but that's a really good thing to call out with the tech world. There is almost always some role related experience. And it depends on where you're entering in your career. So if it's more entry level, there's a lot more flexibility with is this your first job, or did you have a job before this? When you're entering in the customer success world and you're managing a book of business, what the team is looking for is, do you have customer facing experience where you're kind of running the show? You are engaging with executives, you're solving problems, you're putting together plans and executing. So not to say that you have that, that's the only experience that we're looking for, but it definitely, having that kind of domain expertise is something that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's actually great that you mentioned that. You have to have some kind of link. So let's say you can start off as a teacher. If you want to get into tech and go straight to Slack, that might be a reach. But if you find an education platform that really values your domain expertise as a teacher, work there for a bit and then leverage that for a role at, let's say, your dream brand company.
Mm-hmm.
Misha, if you had somebody, I'm curious, if you saw somebody come in like a resume across your desk for maybe a more junior role or mid-level role, a couple of years, let's say 2 to 6 years out of college. It's kind of a range, but let's say that's somebody that's looking for a role like that. And either it's a resume that comes across your desk or somebody just reaches out to you and says, hey, Misha, I'd love to talk to you. I'm really trying to get into customer success. Maybe they don't have that traditional experience. What would be the advice that you would give to somebody for how they should stand out when trying to approach a company like Slack, when maybe it's not that obvious that they would be successful in that role?
Yeah, so I would say really like tangible points around whether it's a project that you've led. So things like, a project that was cross-functional and this was the impact of it. Data points is also really, really unique because in customer success, even though we are not selling the deals or renewing them necessarily, like I have a book of business that equals however many millions of dollars, so that stuff does stand out as well. Like you obviously can't put customers that you've worked with on your resume, but alluding to the size of the company or how ingrained you were with the work that they were doing, any kind of like thought leadership. So were you leading roundtables with customers or like executive briefings? And again, all the buzzwords, but those are the kinds of things that I think really, really stand out, is showing that you were taking the initiative maybe to do a little bit more than just like what the core skills were.
Oh yeah, 100% agreed. I mean, if you want to stand out, you have to communicate outcomes, and that usually is in the in the form of logos or numbers or really things that you've been able to accomplish in previous roles that are obviously related to the roles that you're targeting. So my next question is around something that you mentioned in our previous conversation, and that is that, you know, I believe that it sounds like you're someone that also prioritized finding mentors and people yourself that can kind of help you in your career. So I'm curious, how did you go about doing that? I think a lot of people are confused about what a mentor is. It's really just anybody, I think, that can help you out along the way. It doesn't have to be someone that you check in with on a monthly basis. That could be a mentor, but what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate, very, very early on in my Jigsaw days. I was able to create a strong relationship with the head of customer success. She's actually gone on to lead, like, I think it's global sales at Oracle. But, you know, I think there's some things that you can do to start to, you know, develop that relationship. You know, there's right ways to do it, but you'll hear people say skip levels. So meeting with the person that is one up from your manager. And that is something that I was doing early on in my career, because she was the one that actually hired me as the intern. So it was very natural for me to go back to her and ask her about, you know, what I was thinking of pursuing at Jigsaw, or skills that I needed to develop. But I think a mentor is extremely, extremely important for someone to bounce your ideas off of and give you advice about how to navigate the landscape. There's also this idea or concept, I should say, of like a sponsor. And a sponsor is I think someone that you might leverage to help you you know, advance your career. So, you know, I've had less experience with like having both of those two at the same time, but it's pretty common for people like to put together kind of like, I would say, a business plan for how you want to get to the next step at your career, and what people do you actually need to leverage to help you do that. Because doing it on your own is hard. And I think that's another thing that I've really kind of learned throughout my journey is sentiment from peers and people speaking on your behalf is so important. So that's kind of that idea of a sponsor, like someone that's probably not in your direct management chain, but maybe you know, reports outside of the org that, or the team that you're working on, but someone that knows the work that you're doing and is happy to speak on your behalf is really, really important.
Yeah, and
I'm
I think for
curious.
folks that, sorry, just to kind of add to that before your question, Sergey, I think for folks that, you know, might not have the advantage of, let's say, being in a big brand, also think about maybe previous roles that you had, or think about your friends or colleagues that are in companies that are interesting. You can also leverage those people for connections to others that could be sponsors or mentors down the line.
The other thing I would add to that is, I don't even, you know, and I'm probably deviating a bit from like what the exact definition of a sponsor is and a mentor. But the other thing I would suggest, and I've done this and I've had people do this to me. I actually get messages all the time on LinkedIn. Find a profile that you're interested in, or a person or the company, and reach out to that person and ask them for 15 minutes just to pick their brain. Again, I get those all the time, and I always say yes, because that's how you start to understand what the job is really like. And the other thing just within that point is referrals are really, really crucial when you're starting to like enter maybe a new domain, especially in the technology world. Slack gets hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of resumes every single day. The resumes that were either like formally given by another employee or kind of say, yes, like this is someone you should talk to, you know, those carry a little bit extra weight, because it's almost like they've gone through one round of vetting before they ever get to the recruiters. So I would definitely say don't be shy to reach out and ask folks for just a 15-minute virtual coffee chat to pick their brain. And then the other thing I would say is don't be shy in asking, can I put you down as a referral when I submit my resume?
That's great. And speaking of not being shy, I'm curious how you think about, actually tactically activating your sponsors when you need them in a way that, they makes them actually want to support you? Like, do you actually email someone and say, hey, I'm going for this promotion. Can you like speak on my behalf or say good things about me? How do you do it?
Yeah, I think Slack is the nature of our tool. Everything is out in the open and in your face, and that can be good at sometimes. But I think that the downside is, sifting through all the conversation and activities that are happening to drill into the most important things that you need to get that next job that you're looking for. So where I'm going at with this is, at Slack, a lot of things happen, but not everything is important to the next promotion that I need. So when I'm thinking about, what I want to do next, I'm really kind of thinking about like my brand at Slack and what story I want to tell. And so I actually have like a document where I'll write down a couple of things like, I want to be able to have a strong connection with this individual, or I want to execute against this objective with my customers so that the account executive will speak on my behalf during my next review. So that's kind of how I would say I organize it, is pick the people or the things that are going to help you achieve that, and just make sure that you're working towards it. People are always happy to give feedback. You obviously want to ask for people that you're very confident are going to give you glowing feedback. Like asking for real-time feedback is something that we do a lot at Slack. So it doesn't all have to be like Misha was the best thing in the world, like that. Improvements areas are so important. So I would say that's, asking for what's working and what I can do better. Like being ready and asking for feedback is something that I think is kind of rare. We're trying to do it at Slack, and it's really the only place I've ever worked where we're pushing people to close a meeting and say, do you have any feedback for me?
Now, these are both internal and like customer facing meetings as well, you mean?
Well, mostly internal. Yeah, I've got some customer relationships where it's like, hey, would you feel comfortable sharing a little bit of feedback around how we're working together? But I think that's probably still a muscle I'm developing. It's a little bit trickier.
Got it. So by the way, folks, we have about 12 minutes or so left. So if you have any questions that you want us to address, please drop them into the chat. Actually, Philip asked one earlier that I believe you addressed, because he asked, where does Slack fall in the buy or build continuum? Because you were talking about how Google really built a lot of their own homegrown solution. It sounds to me like Slack is starting to invest in a lot themselves now, because they're trying to build out processes for the team, but it's usually using existing off-the-shelf solutions, or do they build as well, like Google?
I think Slack is definitely in this position where we're trying to invest in best of breed tools.
Got it. Yeah. I think a lot of companies realize you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So if existing solutions that already have been proven to work exist, then you might as well invest in them. So the next question that I have, just as we kind of wrap up this conversation, is I'm curious, to get an understanding of how Slack actually evaluates talent, what it feels like to go through that experience. And I think specifically what's really hard for people especially when they go into a job like in customer success, it's understanding, how do I put my best self forward, aside from talking about outcomes, to make sure that they know, like, I'm a good communicator, for example. So let's take a specific example of soft skills. How does Slack actually test for that when they're evaluating talent?
So I interviewed so long ago. The interview process has changed quite a bit, but I did talk to a peer that recently went through it. And I think there's some unique things that Slack does. And one of them is really getting to understand you as a person and what you have done. And that's where they're kind of testing the soft skills, because they're asking questions around, why did you make that decision at that point in time? So they're kind of testing your ability to succinctly communicate back why you made a specific decision at a certain time. The other thing I think during the interview process is problem solving. So that's a big part of the customer success role. And so it's really how you, and this is true at all the interviews I've gone through, but how you arrived at a decision. So, and that like is definitely something that I remember having to remind myself to do during the interview process is I think what happens is a lot of times we jump to the outcome. So it's like, I did this thing and it was really successful, but really what they want to know is the steps you took to execute, who you worked with cross-functionally, like maybe roadblocks that you ran into and how you were able to kind of pivot around those types of things.
And for you personally, when you would go into these situations, I mean, you've interviewed obviously like the top firms in the world, so I'm sure you did a lot of preparation.
Yeah.
But how would you make sure that you get those stories out in the best way possible? Like, what was your process to prepare for an interview like that?
So when I was going through Google and Slack, I really had one solid story that I used. And in my case, it was a really challenging customer engagement that turned out positively. But I think that's you don't need a million things to be able to talk about. But I was very prepared to talk about the problem, how I solved it, the tactics I deployed, what the outcomes were, and obviously what I would have done differently, reflecting back. So that would be my advice, is pick a scenario that you can easily relate to kind of multiple flavors of questions that you might get.
Actually, I like that advice because I think a lot of times people feel like they have to think about a bunch of different scenarios so that they're ready for whatever question comes their way. But it sounds like what you're saying is if you just go really deep on a big enough problem, you'll be able to talk about different aspects of it.
Yeah, and you also, you want to be really, really familiar with it. And I think that's the other thing, because, during the interview process, you are looking about, the way that you communicate the problem. And if you're not really, really familiar with it, it'll come out pretty quickly that you're searching for the words or that type of thing.
Yeah, fake it till you make it doesn't work in an interview.
Right. But at the same time, I know we have a couple folks here that are either in college or recent grads. The stories that you tell don't have to be just from an internship. It could be from a club that you were a part of. It could be from a business that you tried and failed. So be creative where you pull those stories. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, definitely. It's all about like, the narrative and you being able to play back kind of what role you played and what outcomes were tied to it.
There was another question from Philip, and it kind of alludes to what we were talking about in the past. And I'll read the question as he phrased it. In the customer success role, would you, or how would you, recommend asking a customer to be a mentor or a sponsor? And that's actually, I like that question because a lot of people end up working for their clients.
Mm-hmm.
So, have you seen people do that? Actually develop that kind of mentorship relationship with a client or a customer?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question and spot on. That that's how a lot of times you get your next job is through a connection. I think it all starts with like trust and credibility. So if you jump the gun and you ask for something too quickly in the relationship, it would probably spook a customer. But I would say, it takes time to lay the foundation, especially when you're doing customer success work, because customers expect a lot from us. So whatever it is that's going to build that credibility is where I would say you start with, whether it is, and I'm going to use a whole bunch of buzzwords again, but like delivering something to the customer that's valuable. So some customers want product updates. Every time something's released, they want to know about it. There are other customers that maybe want to be included in events Another example that I see all the time, and I have customers where if they ask a question, they want a response like that. Now, that's not always realistic, but I know that I have some customers that every time I answer a question promptly, it's building a little bit more credibility with them. So I would say, you know, maybe profiling your customers a little bit, knowing what's important to them and what earns you credibility, so that when you are at that point, you know, you're able to have a candid, open conversation. You also have to be able to read people. That's another thing about customer success, right? Is being able to understand, like, is this the kind of customer where I could have a very candid, honest, raw conversation with, or is this someone that's business time all the time?
Got it. I think that's actually great advice and nuanced as well. Absolutely appropriate to go for that ask, to try to build out that type of relationship. It happens all the time, but don't jump the gun. Know that the timing oftentimes matters. I had one quick question as we wrap up here. And by the way, folks, Sergey did drop the survey link into the chat. We really appreciate your feedback. If you don't mind filling that out today, it should take only 3 minutes. We will send you this recording after the call. But my question is, what's next for Misha? I mean, you've been at Slack now for a couple of years. You did a great stint at Salesforce for 5 years. Where do you think your career is going to go after this, or how will it progress in the near future?
You know, I've been doing some soul searching recently. I think the world, you know, the way it is, it's making me think about a change and then no change at all. I haven't quite decided where I'm going to land on the spectrum. But so something that I'm definitely interested in and figuring out how I can work into my role here at Slack is really the program side of piece of it. I'm really interested in taking the knowledge and the experience that I have talking to customers day in and day out and making tweaks to make CSM's lives easier. As a customer success manager, you're kind of like almost like a jack of all trades. You don't have to be the expert in everything, but you do have to have a pulse on everything. And so I think that's what I'm starting to think about is now that we have an army of CSMs and the work is just like the floodgates have opened, like what are those small changes that maybe I could implement or suggest to save my coworkers a little bit of time and be a little bit more efficient. Slack is in the world of, you know, driving efficiency. And I think that is something that I'm starting to kind of think about going forward.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm very confident you're going to be successful at that as well. And it sounds fun too, actually. So very cool. Well, Misha, thank you so much for your time. I actually learned a lot in this conversation as well. And so folks, if you can please provide your feedback, Sergey, drop the link. And also, as Sergey mentioned in the beginning, we have these types of events very often, sometimes on a weekly basis. So we will continue to bring back speakers like Misha. If you're interested in going a step further and you're ready to make a career move in the near future, we just announced that we're opening applications for our winter cohort for our Technology Career Acceleration Program, and Sergey just dropped the link for that if you want to learn more. Misha, thank you so much for the time. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. Super valuable.
Yeah, it was really lovely to spend some time with you all. Good luck, and find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Misha.
I love that, folks.
Take her up on it. Take her up on it.
Sergey, Vadim, thank you so much.
Thank you, Misha. Have a
Bye,
good night, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Good seeing you.